Welcome to another SVT Dharma talk. And today we'll be looking at the importance of mindfulness of the body. But before we start, let's just start with Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay, so having recognized that the Buddha by his own efforts, has become fully awakened, which is the meaning behind Namo Tassa. It's important to understand that for us, we're in a much more fortunate position because we have the teaching of the Buddha to guide us, whereas he didn't have that teaching. And so what he came to understand, he built on the knowledge of others and then had to explore and discover for himself. So it's always interesting to go back to the suttas and see how different expressions of what it is that he came to understand. So this is Saṁyutta in the Saṁyutta Nikāya. It's in the book of, it's in the 4th volume, the book on the 6 sense bases. And it's Saṁyutta Nikāya 35.247, the simile of the 6 animals. Students, suppose a man with limbs wounded and festering would enter a wood of thorny reeds, and the kusa thorns would prick their feet, and the reed blades would slash their limbs. Since that student would thereby experience even more pain and displeasure, thus that student would thereby experience even more pain and displeasure. So too students, some students here, gone to a village or a forest, meet someone who reproaches them thus. This student is acting in such a way, behaving in such a way, is a foul village thorn. In other words, in the context that the Buddha was describing, the students there would have been monks, and they would have been going on alms round to villages. And certain people in the villages would not have necessarily have treated them with respect. In fact, they would have seen that they were, if you like, a burden on the village, expecting alms food or accommodation, or just basically an inconvenience. Or they may feel that the person's behavior is such that they're not worthy of that respect. So that's the meaning behind a foul village thorn. Having understood the person in the village thus, as a thorn, one should understand restraint and non-restraint. In other words, it's for the student to develop the restraint or the non-restraint, and to understand the difference. Because you can't control how people receive you. So all that the student can do, or in this case, the monk can do, is work with restraint and non-restraint within themselves. And how, students, is there non-restraint? Here, having seen a form with the eye, a student is intent upon pleasing form and is repelled by displeasing form. They dwell without having set up mindfulness of the body, with a limited mind, and they do not understand as it really is that liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. So without developing mindfulness of the body, the mind is not developed. And the consequence of not being developed is that unwholesome states persist in the mind. And the Buddha goes on to describe this. It affects not only forms that we see, things that we come across and observe, but equally sounds with the ear, and mental phenomena with the mind, with smells and odors through the nose, through tactile objects and the body, through taste and the tongue, all of the six senses. So in the Buddha's teaching, the six senses are treated all of the same. The classical eye, ear, nose, tongue and touch, and also the mind. And it's important to recognize that there isn't a distinction between these. They operate in the same way as far as the Buddha is concerned. So we might have an object that we see, and we have a functioning eye, and the object and the eye come together and we get eye consciousness. When those three come together, we get contact in the brain, phassa. And with contact, we get feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, neither pleasant or unpleasant. And it's exactly the same for the ear, the nose, the tongue, tactile sense in the body, but also with the mind. So we have mind objects, which would be thoughts or images in the mind. We have an operating mind, and with that comes mind consciousness. When those three come together, it's contact, phassa, and with phassa, then comes feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant or unpleasant. So the mechanism of the mind is exactly the same as the mechanism of other senses. So having gone through all of the senses, including having cognized a mental phenomenon with the mind, the student is intent upon a pleasing mental phenomenon and repelled by a displeasing mental phenomenon. They dwell without having set up mindfulness of the body with a limited mind. And the mind here, it's important to recognize, is the word citta, the heart mind. Okay, it's not mano, it's citta. Yeah. He dwells not only understanding as it really is, he dwells without having set up mindfulness of the body with a limited mind, and he does not understand as it really is that liberation of mind and liberation by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. So we have this couplet, liberation of mind and liberation by wisdom. And there's been a lot of debate over the years about these two forms of liberation. And sometimes individual personalities are linked to liberation of mind, and some personalities are linked or inclined to liberation by wisdom. And the Buddha had liberation both ways. And so the way I'd like to think of this liberation of by mind, this is citta-vimutti, is that if we think of the heart mind as being the emotional seat of the individual, if you like. So this is, if you like, the felt experience of the liberation. So we might call this intuitive, a felt understanding. And liberation by wisdom, we might think of that as more a liberation by direct observation. So we can see the impermanence in something. We can see the breakdown of the stages of dependent liberation, in which case we see that there isn't, if you like, an operating individual in that, but there's a context and a conditionality around our experience. And when those conditions arise, certain things manifest. When those conditions disappear, that experience disappears. So we have these two aspects, the felt experience of the liberation, if you like, and the direct observation. And if we think of these in terms of the body, then what we can think of perhaps is, well, what is the felt experience? of the liberation. And Bhante Vimramsi would often describe momentary release from craving as a consequence of using the 6 R's. So when we release, relax, and re-smile, this is a purification of the mind. And so at the moment of that purification, there's what he would describe as a mundane nibbana. It would be an experience of the mind without craving. But also we have to remember with the 6 R's that there are 2 components. There's the release, the relax, or the recognize, the release and relax. Now that's a purification of the mind. But then we also have to retrain the mind. And that's the re-smiling and returning to the wholesome state. So that completes the 4 stages of right effort. So right effort is to recognize there's an unwholesome state of mind, to release away from the unwholesome state, to bring up a wholesome state, and keep the wholesome state going. So the recognizing the unwholesome state is the recognized step of the 6 R. To release away from the unwholesome state, that is the releasing the mind away from what's distracted you and the relaxing of the tension around your brain. So those are the first 2 stages. But if we only do those stages, if we only work with the relaxed step, we do not retrain our mind, because the 2nd steps, the 3rd and 4th steps of right effort are to bring up a wholesome state and to cultivate the circumstances for the wholesome state to persist. So that's the re-smiling, and then coming back to the feeling of loving kindness or any of the Brahma Viharas. And this is why the Brahma Viharas are particularly helpful to us compared to perhaps mindfulness of breathing. Mindfulness of breathing is neither a wholesome, or the breath is neither wholesome nor unwholesome. It doesn't have that quality. It's a neutral thing. Whereas any of the Brahma Viharas, whether they be loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, or equanimity, these are wholesome states of mind. The Buddha said that, these are the states of mind which are the most wholesome that we can cultivate outside of an experience of nibbana. And so we're coming back, if you like, to a higher level if we come back to the wholesome state compared to the neutral level of the breath. So the whole process of the 6 R's is the encapsulation of right effort. So the student dwells without having set up mindfulness of the body with a limited mind. And they do not understand as it really is the liberation of mind, the liberation by wisdom, whereby those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. So the 6 R's gives us the opportunity to experience this returning to a wholesome state. And what's important here is to recognize the importance of the body in this, because the relaxed step needs us to recognize that there is tension. And that tension corresponds to the craving, the I like it, I don't like it mind, which is attached onto experience. So we have to come into an asomatic awareness, an awareness of the body, in order to release that step. It's not just a mental activity. It's not just an intellectual activity. It's not just an idea. And this gives us I feel like, a key to open the door to why the body is so important. Because there's a wonderful book by Bessel van der Kolk called "The Body Keeps the Score," and it deals with trauma. But what his hypothesis was, which is now, and the book has been out probably 15 years or more, and it's now getting a lot of attention in terms of its impact. What he was saying in that book is that the body basically is a store for what we have experienced. And so if we can tune into the body, we can begin to unpick what's going on. And all of the things that we're doing with the Buddhist meditation is about recognizing patterns of behavior, patterns of thinking, patterns of reaction, and seeing how those patterns are ingrained. They're learned, they're part of our belief, they're part of our reflex. And the process of meditation is to reveal these patterns and to see, through experiencing dependent origination, seeing the conditionality of that experience, how we get caught up in the same patterns of behavior. And the Buddha talked about proliferation in thinking. So this is papancha. And this just ties us into the patterns of thinking that have occurred in the past. And part of what we're doing with the meditation is to cut across that. And the process of cutting across that is to recognize when craving manifests. When craving is the response to a particular feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant or unpleasant. And because we have a physical body, and because our mind, heart, and body are so interconnected, we get a somatic response to that craving. And the somatic response to that craving is either a subtle or less than subtle tension. And one of the things that is really helpful that Bhante Viramsey brought into awareness, if you like, in a much greater sense, through the development of the 6 R's, was to develop a sensitivity to when this tension arises. And one of the things that's really helpful is that when we begin to tune into this tension, we begin to see the path is not a path of acquisition, of attaining more and more refined states, but it's actually a path of more and more refined relinquishment of this tension. And when we learn to relinquish this tension, then the mind evolves naturally. It moves naturally through the states of jhana. It moves naturally through the Brahma Viharas. We don't have to be deterministic about what we're doing there. What we need to do is look after the conditions which allow this to evolve. And the conditions are this progressive relinquishment of tension when it arises. And so the progress that we make through the practice is a greater and greater sensitivity to when this tension arises. And that in itself then takes us through the different stages of the jhanas and different stages of the Brahma Viharas. So sensitivity to the body is really important. Now, the Buddha fully understood that the body can be a very attractive thing to focus on. And so if we look at the Mindfulness of Body Sutta, there's whole areas of practice which are encouraging us to have a different relationship, a non-attachment to the body. Now, one of the very interesting things that we've worked with, and part of the practice that I teach, and when I teach with Bhante Dharmakabesi as well on retreats, is to introduce a style of yoga that we call Sakitta, because the Sakitta yoga works with the energetic body and not the physical body. And one of the things it does is it gives us a mechanism to change our relationship to the physical body. There's a natural attraction to the physical body, and it's one that we have to release from. But there are constructive ways to do it. And the Buddha said, of all the attachments that we could have, attachment to the body is the least problematic because there's a natural change that happens in our body. It ages, it has accidents, it evolves over time. Any attachment to the body over time we see is false. It can't be sustained. We can't retain a youthful body. There's a natural progression. And so of all the subtle attachments that we could have, the Buddha said attachment to the body is the one which is least problematic to get a handle on. So this is a great encouragement. So before we do that, we have to develop a mindfulness of the body. And what the Buddha is saying is that without the mindfulness of the body, a student who dwells without having set up mindfulness of the body with a limited mind and does not understand as it really is the liberation of mind, the liberation by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. So he then wants to give you, or give us as students, a really clear image of what this means. Suppose, students, a student should catch 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds. In other words, 6 animals who live in a different environment and have different priorities, and tie them by a strong rope. The student would catch a snake, a crocodile, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and a monkey, and tie each of them by a strong rope. Having done so, the student would then tie the ropes together with a knot in the middle and release them. Then those 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds would each pull in the direction of its own feeding ground and domain. The snake would pull one way, thinking, let me enter an anthill. The crocodile would pull another way, thinking, let me enter the water. A bird would pull another way, thinking, let me fly up into the sky. The dog would pull another way, thinking, let me enter a village. The jackal would pull another way, thinking, let me enter a charnel ground, an area where they lay out dead bodies before they've been cremated. The monkey would pull another way, thinking, let me enter a forest. Now, when these 6 animals become worn out and fatigued, they would be dominated by the one among them that was the strongest. They would submit to it and come under its control. So these 6 different animals, well, these are the 6 senses, including the mind. And sometimes one sense is more dominant than another, and we just get led by that. So too, students, when a student has not developed and cultivated mindfulness directed to the body, the eye pulls in the direction of agreeable forms and disagreeable forms are repulsive. The ear pulls in the direction of agreeable sounds and disagreeable sounds are repulsive. The nose pulls in the direction of agreeable odors and disagreeable odors are repulsive. The tongue pulls in the direction of agreeable tastes and disagreeable tastes are repulsive. The body pulls in the direction of agreeable tactile objects and disagreeable tactile objects are repulsive. The mind pulls in the direction of agreeable mental phenomena and disagreeable mental phenomenon are repulsive. In such a way, it is in such a way that there is non-restraint. In other words, everything is pulling us in different directions. Okay, and eventually one of the senses will dominate and we'll end up moving in that direction. But there's no restraint. There's no choice about this. We're just being led by our senses. Yeah. And how, students, is there restraint? Here, having seen a form with the eye, a student is not intent upon pleasing form and not repelled by displeasing form. So, not intent and not repelled. So if we're not reaching out and we're not pushing away, then what are we doing? What is our response to that form? Okay. Well, the Buddha comes on to answer that in a moment. The student dwells, having set up mindfulness of body with a measureless mind, and understands as it really is that liberation of mind, the liberation by wisdom, wherein those unwholesome and evil states cease without remainder. Having heard a sound with the ear, cognized a mental phenomenon with the mind, a tactile object with the body, a taste with the tongue, a sound with the ear, having cognized a mental phenomenon with the mind, the student is not intent upon a pleasing mental phenomenon and not repelled by a displeasing mental phenomenon. The student dwells, having set up mindfulness of the body with a measureless mind. Okay. Now, this measureless mind is a very interesting word because when we measure things, we have to have a reference point. And that reference point is ourselves. And when we have that, then the mind is limited because we're taking the experience personally. We're measuring it against something, a past experience, an expectation of a future experience. But when we're in a measureless mind, that act of measurement is not taking place. And then the experience is simply accepted for what it is, not by comparing it with something else. The student dwells, having set up mindfulness of the body with a measureless mind, and they understand as it really is that liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. It is in such a way that there is restraint. Okay, so the restraint comes when there's no longer that moving towards or repelling away from any sensory experience. So the moving towards or the pulling away from, this is craving. This is the I like it, I don't like it mind. So what's being described here is a mind without craving. Now, a mind permanently without craving is the mind of the Arahant. But that doesn't mean that we as practitioners can't experience moments where the mind is without craving. And the way that Bhante Ramsey would describe the mind without craving is the culmination of the 6R process. By going through the 6R process, we cultivate a mind which is momentarily without craving. And as soon as we do that, we open the mind up to a different experience. And that different experience begins to train us into what it means to have this state of mind, this state of mind that is not being pulled towards something or being repelled by something. So the Buddha wanted to describe this in a clear way. So what he did is he extended the metaphor that he'd been using. Suppose, students, a man would catch 6 animals, just like before, all with different domains and different feeding grounds, and tie them by a strong rope, just as before. He would catch a snake, a crocodile, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and a monkey, and tie each by a strong rope. Having done so, he would bind them to a strong post or pillar. So not just knot the ropes together. Then those 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds would each pull in the direction of their own feeding ground and domain, just like before. So the snake would go to the anthill, and the crocodile would go to the water, the bird to the air, the dog would go to the village, the jackal to the charnel ground, and the monkey to the forest. Now, when these 6 animals become worn out and fatigued, they would stand close to that pillar or post. They would sit down there. They would lie down there. So too, students, when a student has developed and cultivated mindfulness directed to the body, the eye does not pull in the direction of agreeable forms, nor are disagreeable forms repulsive. Now, it's very important to understand what's being said here. Because if we look at the surface of what the Mindfulness of Body Sutta says, or even the Satipatthana Sutta, it would be easy to think that to cultivate mindfulness of the body, we need to have a relationship which is repulsed by the body. Now, certain aspects of those suttas describe practices which are designed to overturn the instinctive attachment to the body. So there are charnel ground practices. There's ways of seeing the body made up of the internal organs and things like that. Now, if we're not careful here, we will develop what are called the asubha practices, and they are only really for people who have very, very strong attachment. What we're looking for is not to develop a repulsion of the body, because if you see what he says here, the eye does not pull in that direction of agreeable forms, nor are disagreeable forms repulsive. So we're not looking to develop a mind which is has a repulsive relationship to everything it sees or experiences. We're looking for a mind that has neither a pull in the direction or a repulsion. So we're looking for a mind that is balanced. And one of the things that Bhante Ramsey pulled out in his teaching is that if we look at the Mindfulness of the Body Sutta, or if we look at the Satipatthana Sutta, one of the things that's very clear in that sutta is that we're looking to develop a different quality of mind. So, for instance, the Mindfulness of Body Sutta will invite us to be aware of the breath. And we look at the breath and we simply know whether it's a long breath or a short breath, whether we're breathing in or whether we're breathing out. But then there's also this absolutely essential aspect of mindfulness of the breath. Breathing in, we tranquilize the bodily formation. Breathing out, we tranquilize the bodily formation. So it's not that the quality of the breath brings a tranquil mind. That's not what's being stated here. It's just saying that as we notice our breath coming in, we check in to how the bodily formation is. And if we see that there is an energetic tension, we release this. We tranquilize that. Now, this is very important because when we begin to see the practice and recognize that when craving is present in the mind, tension comes up into the body. And there's often a restlessness in the mind. Then we need to tranquilize the bodily formation. And this is what the 6 R's are doing. If we understand this connection between the tension in our body and craving, then we can begin to use the body to release craving. This is what somatic awareness gives us. So mindfulness of the body becomes extremely important in recognizing when tension is present. Now, we might say, well, what happens when we get into the higher level of jhanas? Because surely the higher level of jhanas, there's no physical body that we're aware of. After all, they're called the arupa jhanas. There's an absence of rupa, the material manifestation of experience. Well, that's completely true. But the jhanas are states where there are no hindrances. So when the hindrances have dropped away, the jhanas begin to evolve. But then when we're in the jhanas and suddenly we get distracted, we've come out of the jhana momentarily. We're still in the area of the jhana itself, but we have come out of that quality because we got distracted. We have a hindrance. Well, as soon as we have a hindrance, the body manifests again. We can feel the body. So then we can recognize the quality of the hindrance by the impact in the body. It might be a subtle tension, a subtle movement. We siksa, and we're back in the jhana again. So in the arupa, once we remain in the arupa jhanas, yes, there's no body to feel. But then we have to be in this process of constant relinquishment. So when we get distracted, something arises and we need to relinquish it. And when that thing arises, there's a subtle presence of the body because we can feel a tension and we relax the tension. So anytime we feel tension in our practice, this is the somatic response in the body. So depending on what our experience in this particular day is, or this particular practice, even if we're up in the stages of nothingness, so we're in the arupa jhana of nothingness, there's nothing to be seen. And then the mind inclines to want to see something. And the consequence of wanting to see something is that tension arises. Well, wanting is one of the hindrances. This is the attachment to experience. And then we need to release the tension. So the tension arises, and the releasing is the act of relinquishment. In the act of relinquishment, we begin to develop the mind that's moving in the direction of the progressive jhana experience. So mindfulness of body is intimately linked to the awareness of tension. So in the same way, the student develops and cultivates mindfulness directed to the body. The eye does not pull in the direction of agreeable forms, nor are disagreeable forms repulsive. The ear does not pull in the direction of agreeable sounds, nor are disagreeable sounds repulsive. The nose does not pull in the direction of agreeable odors, nor are disagreeable odors repulsive. The tongue does not pull away in the direction of agreeable tastes, nor are disagreeable tastes repulsive. The body does not pull away in the direction of agreeable tactile objects, nor are disagreeable tactile objects repulsive. The mind does not pull away in the direction of agreeable mental phenomenon, nor are disagreeable mental phenomenon repulsive. It is in such a way that there is restraint. So what is that process? Well, it's the process of the 6 R's. Because we see the mind's inclination to pull towards or to be repulsed. And that is present by a subtle tension. If we let it cultivate, that tension will get greater. And we'll move from the I like it, I don't like it mind, which is the manifestation of that tension, into the story behind. So acting on that tension and developing it. And that's upadana, the clinging, the grasping hold on. So the I like it, I don't like it mind is a mental response. The grasping hold is, if you like, the somatic response. It's the action. So we need to catch that process, and we catch it by being aware of the arising of tension. How do we become aware of the arising of tension? Well, whilst we're caught up in the thought, we don't see that tension. And then we recognize our mind is not on the object of attention. That might be loving kindness. In that moment, we have re-established mindfulness of the body, because we have recognized that the mind is not where it needs to be. As soon as we've done that, we're immediately back into the state, if you like, that mindfulness gives us, which is an awareness. Now, it's also important to recognize that there is nothing moral about mindfulness. If we think of mindfulness as simply cultivating attention, we can cultivate attention for good reasons and for much less than good reasons. It's what we do with the mindfulness that's important. And that's what is encapsulated within the 6 R's, because there is the purification of mind and then the retraining of the mind. This is what makes the mindfulness have an ethical quality to it. So we recognize our mind has got distracted. We release away from the distraction. Okay, so that's one of the animals is pulling us in one direction. We choose to turn our attention to the tension and tightness that we might feel around our brain and in our body. So this is then coming into the somatic response to that unwholesome state. And the thing to recognize about unwholesome states is they don't have to be bad things. They don't have to be morally bad things. They are simply things that we have taken personally. That's what makes something unwholesome. When we identify with our experience, that is unwholesome. And why is it unwholesome? Well, unfortunately, I don't have the reference with me here, but it's in the Saṁyutta, first volume of the Saṁyutta Nikāyas. It talks about how does Mara operate. And if you think of Mara as simply the energy that wants us to remain connected to things we identify with. Okay. So it's the energy that fuels craving. It's the energy that fuels clinging. It's the energy that fuels papancha, this proliferation. Well, and this is in, I've got Bhikkhu Bodhi's page reference, but I don't have the actual sutta reference. So if you've got Bhikkhu Bodhi's Saṁyutta Nikāya, this is on page 233. And basically it simply describes how Mara can only operate when there is one thing present, and that is the sense of I. So, unwholesome are things that we identify with, that give us a strong sense of I. And there's another reference on page 215 where it says that Mara operates when there's a sense of this is me. This is mine, this is my own, is present. So, all of the time, we're looking to modify this attachment to identity. And one of the great strengths of what Bhante Ramsey taught was that the 6 R's are a way of removing this identity with our experience. So we recognize what we've identified with. That's what's pulled the mind away. We release away from that thought or that feeling. We don't give it the energy of our attention. Remember, Sister Kima used to say that We fuel the hindrances by giving them our attention. So what we're doing with the release step is we're taking charge of our attention and turning our attention away from what distracted us. And then we investigate. We investigate the presence of tension, either around our brain or in our body. And we release that, or we relax that. So that's the first steps. Recognize, release, and relax. And then we retrain our mind by substituting a wholesome state, which is the smile. Smiling changes the chemistry of our brain, even if it's a mechanical smile rather than a genuine feeling of well-being or happiness. It doesn't matter. This is now being confirmed by scientists. The impact of simply smiling has, even if it's a mechanical and false smile. And then return, if necessary, regenerating the sense of loving kindness or whatever the Brahma Viharas are, and staying with that. And that way we get a safeguard against Mara. So, strong post or pillar. This, students, is a designation for mindfulness directed to the body. Okay, so this is the importance of mindfulness of the body. Because it's only in the body do we see this somatic relationship to our craving, the I like it, I don't like it mind. Therefore, students, you should train yourselves thus. We will develop and cultivate mindfulness directed to the body. Make it our vehicle. Make it our basis. Stabilize it. Exercise ourselves in it and fully perfect it. Thus, you should train yourselves. And from Bhante Vimaramsa's perspective, the training that we need to do is to cultivate an even greater sensitivity to the arising of tension, which is expressed through the body. So we need this mindfulness of body to see this tension arising. And again, this is where working with the energetic body is very helpful. So when we work with the energetic body, we don't need the physical body to support us. We can relax the physical body. And so with the Sakita Yoga, combined with the TWIM, we have this mechanism for being able to either sit or do our daily activities without excessive tension in the body. The advantage of that is that we become more sensitive to when tension arises. And it's the arising of tension, which is the marker for craving. And so the Buddha is inviting us to develop this mindfulness of body so that we are able to see how we can tranquilize the bodily formation, which is one of the principal instructions in the Satipatthana Sutta and the Mindfulness of Body Sutta. Because if we're not habituating tension in the body, we can see it when it arises much more clearly. Using the 6 R's, we release away from it. So instead of being pulled in each direction by one of our 6 senses, we can let the senses settle around this post, which is developed by mindfulness of the body. And this post is the body free of this tension. Okay, so in a short sutta, there's many different threads. But I do like suttas where the Buddha, if you like, paints a different picture, paints an analogy or uses a metaphor or a simile in this case to explain more easily what would perhaps be intellectually quite difficult to grasp. Okay, so perhaps we just take a few moments to reflect on that. So sit comfortably. Softly rotate your inner thighs towards the midline, and that will help you release tension out of your hips. If you drop the inner edge of your shoulder blades, okay, not the whole shoulders, but just the inner edge, you'll create space around your heart. If you softly smile, you'll notice you'll release your neck. Come down into the energetic center of the body, sometimes called the hara, and that's about 2 inches or about 3 or 4 fingers down below the navel, halfway into the body. And just give permission for this part of your body to take charge of the structure and support that you need. So now deeply relax your body. Let your body go and let it move until it finds balance. Now, if you find yourself falling backwards as you relax, then maybe put a little bit more height under the back rim of your pelvis. So your pelvis is tilting forward a little. And it enables you to find a place where your body moves into balance. And the thing to recognize about balance is it is a place without tension. Softly smile. Relax any holding or gripping around your brain. And soften out any tension in your body. And we're just going to do a little experiment. I want you to bring to mind something that's felt difficult and challenging in your life. Something that's not been easy to resolve. And just notice the response in your body. And now, as best you can, do the 6 R's. So recognize that response. Don't pay attention, but relax the holding and bracing around your brain and soften around that feeling in your body. Just soften, not try to get rid of it. Just soften around the edges of it. Might be quite big, might be quite small. Might be the whole of your body. Softly smile and gently come back to wishing yourself well. If you notice a resistance, soften around the feeling of resistance in your body. And remember, your physical brain is part of your physical body. Gently smile. Now be aware of the contact of your body with the floor. So maybe your feet on the floor, seat on a chair, or your legs on the side of your legs on the floor if you're sitting cross-legged. Take a deliberate breath in and breath out. And softly and gently open your eyes. Okay. Any questions around or any reflections around the sutta, the importance of the body as part of the practice, and the way the Buddha described using the body? or anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Hugh. That was very useful. In the beginning, you mentioned a book about how the body stores trauma. Would you mind sharing the title of the book and the author again? Is that?
Yes, I can pop that down in the chat. It's so it's by Bessel van der Kolk, and it's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Great.
Not an easy read because it deals a lot with trauma and different aspects of trauma that people have experienced. But it's a very insightful book for this relationship between mind's experience, the experience of the heart, and the physical representation and manifestation in the body.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
So perhaps I can just ask, Paul, how did you get on with this session?
Hi.
Hello.
I have a question. Should we be constantly monitoring our body all the time? Like I'm walking, I'm sitting.
Okay. I think this is a very, very good question, because if we look at the Satipatthana Sutta, one way of reading it would suggest that we need to be constantly tuning in to everything that's going on in the body at all times. But this, I think, is a misreading of the Satipatthana Sutta. It says things like, when we extend an arm, know that we're extending it. When we're sitting down, know that we're sitting down. What this means, simply be aware of what your body's just doing, but not to the minute degree. So one of the things that when we start to work energetically in the body, the only thing that I invite people to be aware of is when tension arises. In the meantime, just get on with everything that's going on, but be aware when tension arises. So as we get used to working with the body free of tension, and that's one of the definitions of balance. So once we learn to use our body in balance, then we become sensitized to when tension arises. That's the only time in that context that we need to be aware of what's going on then and what the triggers are, and then to release that tension. So what we become more and more interested in is what interrupts the balance, rather than monitoring everything every moment. I'm not sure if I've explained that well enough, but let me know, Paul.
So we're not treating it as an object of meditation then. We're
No.
sending out and okay.
Yeah, you see, it's a little bit like using the loving kindness. Loving kindness is a reference point in the practice. We're not using the attributes of loving kindness, the presence of joyfulness, and using the joy as the object of attention. We're using the loving kindness as a reference point that we come back to. So if we're looking to develop concentration jhanas, then we can move into looking at the attributes of each jhana. So for instance, in infinite space, we would absorb into the feeling of infinite space. Whereas what we're being asked to do in the aware jhanas is just use the infinite space as a reference point. So we just kind of just know it's there, but we don't get absorbed. But we're interested in whatever takes us away from that, so that we can siksara and come back. So we're just using it as a background to show us the movements of the mind. With the body, when we get used to using the body without tension, in balance, then we're using the appearance of tension as a reference point to bring the mind back. We're not using the body itself as the object of attention. We're just using it as a reference place to see movements of mind. Does that add clarity or not?
Yes, I think I understand that.
Okay, it's a very important question that you ask here, because the natural inclination of the mind is towards concentration, as you described. We can get very caught up in a manifestation of the body. So if I got attached to the feeling of comfortableness in the body, which comes with jhana, for instance, then I'm just going to get absorbed into that feeling. And that's going to then hold my mind in the third jhana. Whereas if I'm simply recognizing there's comfort, but not holding on to it, because it's impermanent, as all manifestations are, then I'm able to see what moves my mind away from this state, and I'm able to release and relax. Because that process is then releasing craving, it's a relinquishment model, the mind will naturally develop into fourth jhana and further jhanas. So this is a very different approach, and it's what Bhante Vimramsi developed as his approach. And I think it's what transformed what were current practices at the time of the Buddha into other practices. So there's a lovely reference in the Saṁyutta, which I referenced in a previous talk, where some students come across some students of the Buddha come across students of other sects, and they kind of go, "Oh, you know, we develop Brahma Viharas just like you do, and we release away from the hindrances in the same way that you do. So what's the difference between your method of teaching from your teacher and ours?" And the students are quite new, so they're not quite sure. So they go off to the Buddha and say, "We met with these people, you know, what is the difference?" And the Buddha says, "Well, the difference is that with this approach, you develop the factors of enlightenment. And one of the factors of enlightenment is the investigation. And so what we're using is the jhana itself to be the reference point to see movements, to investigate movements of mind. Whereas if we use the jhana as a concentration practice, then we're taking the attribute as the object and trying to absorb completely into that attribute. So they are subtly different. And the challenge is that sometimes we can read material and it won't necessarily distinguish these two approaches. So someone who's doing concentration jhanas will indeed experience exactly the same attributes of the different jhanas as someone who's practicing the aware jhanas. And in fact, they may experience them in more intensity because actually they're taking the attribute as the object of attention. But from the Buddha's point of view, he's not interested in that. He's interested in the investigation, which then brings the clear-sightedness, because he wants you to see with wisdom. He wants you to see conditionality. He wants you to see the three marks: impermanence, dukkha, suffering or unsatisfactoriness, and the fact that these are non-personal, that they're not under our control. And because we see those, we see the Four Noble Truths. So those are the aspects of wisdom that he's looking for us to develop, not to develop an absorption into the attribute. That's what he was taught by his early teacher. And that, if you like, was the origin, or his insight was to see that this is not enough.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
I've got one other question.
Yes, keep
You
coming.
mentioned Mindfulness of Body Sutta. Is
Yep.
that the Satipatthana or is that a separate sutta?
No, that's a different sutta. There's mindfulness of breath, mindfulness of body, and the Satipatthana Sutta. Let me just see.
Ah,
I think I might have it here. Yes, it's the Kayagata Sati Sutta. It's Majjhima Nikāya 119.
thank you.
Okay. Okay, Nanda, how did you get on today?
It's brilliant, Hugh. Could I ask you, how do I become aware of my body when I'm in arupa jhanas? Or
Okay.
another way of asking is, how do I become aware of the tension in my body or the craving in my body when I'm in arupa jhanas?
Okay. Well, when we're in the arupa jhanas, if
Yeah,
we're completely in the arupa jhanas, that we won't be aware of the body.
yeah,
But we don't sustain, particularly with the aware jhanas, because we're not absorbing into an attribute of that jhana, but we have a much lighter relationship with the jhanas. Then we drop out of the jhanas, you know, when the mind gets disturbed. So, for instance, if we're in, perhaps it's easier to describe it in the higher jhanas, where, for instance, nothingness, and then something comes up in the mind. There might be a subtle shape or a flash of light or a ripple in the background, and the mind holds on to it. You know, what's that? What, you know, as soon as we've done that, we've attached onto the experience. Now, what Bhante Viramsī would say is, as soon as you see that, relax straight away. But if we don't relax straight away, then we get pulled out of the jhana completely. But when he says relax straight away, what is it we're relaxing? We're relaxing the tension. It can be a subtle tension. So what's happening is we're becoming aware of the body. Because if we get aware of the tension, we're aware of body. So then we relax and we come back into the aware jhana again. So any inclination of the mind, seeing the mind lean towards something, that leaning has a tension component. It can be very subtle. We don't need to confirm it's a physical feeling. We just need to see the leaning of the mind and relax. In the relaxing, we automatically deal with the tension that we're talking about. So these very high states of arupa jhana, we no longer do the 6 R's, we simply just relax the tension. Earlier down in the arupa jhanas, for instance, infinite space, for instance, we may find that the attributes of infinite space are interesting, or we might even get invading thoughts. We may be so enamored perhaps by the subtle feeling that we're having that we begin to identify with it. Oh, this is what I like this feeling. It's, I want this feeling again. And that in itself creates a tension. And then we release the tension. Because as soon as we've expressed the opinion, I like this, right? Once we've identified with it, we're already in the hindrances. And we subtly release and relax, and we come back into the jhana again. So this is the difference between the aware jhanas and the concentration jhanas, because the concentration jhanas, we're completely absorbed. We don't get disturbed by things. until that process of absorption reaches a natural end, and then we come back out again. With the aware jhanas, this aspect of investigation is still present, which is really important. And you can see this when you look at Majjhima Nikāya 111. I don't have the Majjhima Nikāya with me today, but that's the Sariputta's description of going through the jhanas. And the contact, the feeling, and all the rest of it is still present. So what you're recognizing is that all of the attributes, all of the perception, everything is present. And it says, and he recognized these one by one as they occurred. Okay, so the consequence of being in the aware jhanas is that all of those aspects of experience can be present. Each of them will create tension, and we relax away from them. So what 111 confirms is that the mind is still investigating. It's not absorbed. And that's where the value of that particular sutta is, because it confirms, if you like, the non-absorption aspect of working through the jhanas. Nanda, has that answered your question?
Yeah, that's great, Hugh. That's a great help. Could I please ask you, when I'm in arupa jhanas, how do I relax? Because sometimes when I'm in arupa jhanas, I am so relaxed.
Okay. Well, you only need to, when your mind has been distracted from the awareness of being in that jhana. So, for instance, in infinite space, there's a feeling of everything kind of moving away from you. So you're just staying with that. And as long as you're staying with that feeling, that's fine. But if you start then to identify with it, or an image comes up, or a thought comes up, or you get distracted by a sound, then you 6R. But at that stage, the 6Rs are sort of kind of blending all together. So it's like the release, the recognize, release, relax, re-smile, and return are all just sort of blending together, almost like a single activity of the mind. Okay, and then we come back to being aware of this expansive feeling. But the thing is not to get attached to the expansive feeling, because if we retain the investigative component, then that expansion feeling is going to change as we move into infinite consciousness. So this is why just cultivating a concentration on individual aspects is not helpful. We actually want to see the change as it occurs, as we go through. So we can stay in infinite space, and we can feel this expansiveness. And then often what students will do, perhaps on a retreat, is, they'll see the expansiveness disappearing, and they'll try and get back to that expansive feeling because they think that's where they need to be. Whereas actually the change is what they need to observe. Okay. And that's often the hardest thing to recognize, is that the mind will evolve on its own, and our task is simply to observe it and not try to control it. The thing that we do is that when we get disturbed out of that process, then we 6R and come back.
Yes, thank you. Could I ask you one more question, please, if I may? When I'm in arupa arupa jhanas, how do I not get attached? How do I kind of remove I or myself, or
well, one of the ways that we can think of it is that whichever arupa jhana we're in, we know there's more to be done.
yeah.
Okay, so however pleasant it is, and I mean, it's not just arupa jhana. It's third jhana. The body, we've perhaps struggled with the body for long periods, and now we're in third jhana, and suddenly the body is completely peaceful and it's calm and it's comfortable, and we have a huge confidence that we can continue. And then the back of our mind, there's that, oh, I don't want to lose this sense of comfort. But we're not in charge of that. It's not under our control. And one of the things to recognize is that all of the experiences in the jhanas are impermanent. They only arise when the conditions are there for them to arise. And I think that's partly what the Buddha saw when he was practicing. He could sustain these very refined states of mind for long periods, but at some stage or another, he would have to come back out and wash and eat and go to the toilet and all the rest of it. And so he'd be back in the mundane world again with all of its issues and problems. So you get this refined respite from the mundane world, but you have to return to it. And that, I think, is ultimately the meaning behind, and there is more to be done because it hasn't shown the release from that process. So however refined and pleasant our experiences are, we need to also to recognize that they change, and in that change they have dukkha, and in the fact that they change and we can't control whether they change or not, that is an aspect of anatta, which is they are not under our personal control. And that in itself, if we reflect on that, then if you like, there's an appetite for relinquishing away from those aspects and finding something different.
Yes, that's great. There's one more question, here, please, if I may. When I sit to meditate, do I just sit and just meditate? And that's one option that I have. Or another option is saying, oh, I'm sitting and meditating, but I want to stay in, let's say, in the fifth jhana, 5 minutes, or the sixth jhana, 10 minutes, or because the reason I'm asking is sometimes I stay in different arupa jhanas a lot. Sometimes I just go very, very quickly to the seventh jhana.
Okay. Well, there are two things here. The first is the importance of intention. You need to set up an intention at the start of your practice. So if you're looking to explore particular types of jhana, then you don't set up an intention, I want to be in fifth jhana. What Bhante Vimamsi and Sister Kema used to advise and say was necessary is that you should say something like, in this sitting, I will go no higher than fifth jhana. So the progression up and down is just what it will be, but you'll have set an intention to go no higher than, rather than I'm going to this particular one. So that's the first thing. Because if we just say I'm going to this particular one, we set a boundary and restriction on the brain, and we set up this judging and measuring mind. Am I here? Am I here yet? Am I there? What is it? And this just makes working with the jhanas much more difficult. So intention gives clarity of mind. So if you want to work in specific jhanas, work with that. Otherwise, simply sit and observe and see where your mind goes. And sometimes you'll simply sit, you'll start off with the loving kindness, and almost instantaneously you'll be in nothingness and equanimity. And that's also fine. Don't again measure and judge, just stay with the way the mind is.
Yes, that's a great help here. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so hello Gopi, good to see you with us. Do you have any questions?
Just now you have spoken about the Arup Jhana. No, I think I have reached there. Hello, sir.
Yep. Sorry, say that again. I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, just now you are speaking about Arup Jhanas, no?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hello, sir. Just now you are speaking about Arup Jhanas, no?
That's right.
I think I have reached there. In two everyday daily meditation, 2 hour quiet meditation, I think whatever you said, I am experiencing it.
Okay.
Hello?
So are you saying you're experiencing a quiet state of mind? Do you have a question?
That infinite space, like a weightless body.
Yep.
That infinite space where you don't feel weight of the body, you feel like raising up.
Yep. Well, the infinite space has this feeling of expansiveness.
Yeah, I feel I am raising up.
Well, if you're raising up, this can also depends on what's happening in your mind. Do you have a lot of joy in your mind at the moment?
Yeah, joy not coming properly, but it's just like raising up. I felt.
Okay. So this could be infinite space, certainly, because some people in second jhana, when they get a lot of uplifting joy, they can feel a sense of lightness in the practice and feel like their body is very, very light. But with infinite space, we've lost the reference of the body. So in that sense, the mind can go, well, yes, my body seems to be floating because I can't feel it anymore. Yeah, so this is fine, but don't, as it were, don't look for that experience. And if you recognize it's there, again, once you recognize it, release, relax, smile, come back, and just stay with the sense of infinite space.
Okay, sir. Okay. Okay, sir.
Okay. And just whilst generally, I did a little exercise at the end where we were settled, we were just moving into meditation, and I asked you to introduce a problem. And I just wanted to know, did you notice the somatic reaction in your body when you did that? So that's an open question.
No reaction in the body. Only I felt it at the last time.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And May, did you notice something?
No, only this much I have noticed. I felt I am in that space. Quiet mind, after a long time sitting in quiet mind, all these states come up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, quiet mind, then there's a tendency for the mind to be in a state of equanimity. So when you think about something that's been disturbing you, the mind really just doesn't latch onto it at all, and it just lets it go. So perhaps I can just ask May, how did you feel when you just introduced something? Did you get a somatic response?
It's a very nice, excuse me, very nice experiment, but test. Simple, does require a a level of mindfulness though. If we want to catch it at the onset. But I found it interesting to see how fast the 6 hours kick in. For me, that's more interesting. Really, to see the what's the word? The time period it takes for the mind to either intentionally bring the 6 hours in or have an automatic response. The 6 hours itself is an automatic response. Anyway, it's more like a game, really.
Yes, but actually in daily life, this will come through quite often, because we'll find ourselves get caught in something, and then if we can come into the somatic response rather than the thought about what's going on and all the machinations that go on in our head around that, but if we can come into the actual physical presence and allow that to release, okay, or soften around it, it takes us out of a verbalization around this. So we don't have to understand it. We don't have to try and reconcile it in our mind. We can simply soften around the tension in the body, just recognizing the tension is there. And by softening around the tension, we change our relationship to whatever it is that's going on. So it takes us out of that dialogue of needing to understand or needing to find the right word to express. Soften, we don't have a complex vocabulary enough for all the things that we can feel in our body. But if we just recognize that whatever's going on, we can soften and relax around, we have a way of working with it.
Yeah, it's well, the way I see it's kind of like a game to see how quick we catch it before the mental proliferation goes, the looping comes in. So how quick do we, how
Then,
how fast?
and then sometimes we can do it quickly, and then we feel the disappointment of the proliferation not happening.
I haven't reached there yet.
Sometimes we enjoy our reaction.
Sometimes
it gives us energy. Sometimes it gives us an energy kick or something like that, and it's like you've got some work to do, some physical work perhaps. How much easier is it to do if you're feeling angry compared to something else?
Too
then
funny.
we see the stickiness and complexity of the mind, and we still don't have to.
Yeah, indeed. And the games that we play with ourselves every day.
So okay, any other questions anyone would like to ask? Okay, well, simply to say thank you and to finish with the closing prayer. So, may suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May Devas and Nagas of mighty power share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Hugh. Take care. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye now.